believe in qualified review. What qualified review is, it's not like I hand it off to my son, who is a early BSD admin right now. He's going into the 8th grade. And he has a little problem with partitioning from time to time. He seems to believe that the C partition doubles the size of his apparent disk space. But the thing is he's not qualified to review a piece of code yet. A qualified person to review it is somebody who's worked in this industry for a while and is covered quite thoroughly by seeing how this plays out in industry. We're professionals. An issue list and a way of mitigating things is also important. At Berkeley, we mitigated hundreds of issues long before they ever saw release. And I don't really get a strong sense of that. Maybe I'm wrong about this, but I haven't seen it. And I would welcome seeing more of that because that would make me feel comfortable. There's also got to be an independent authority ensuring process is being followed. BSD had Berkeley, and Berkeley had significant pieces of review. It could have done better. I think it should have done better, but you have to have something there. 386 BSD had DDJ and its publishers, and before we could release anything, we met with a lot of people. We had to jump through several hoops. We never told anybody about these because it didn't seem to be important at the time. We thought that they expected this of us anyway, so it was not to be a matter to really spend a lot of time on. But that's something, somebody has to step up to the bat and say, these guys did their job. And that's where a lot of the veracity in maintaining that something has done its job comes from. Now the third thing I think meant how we got into this is none of this would have happened if we hadn't had a Napster and a Napster decision. Because there were a lot of judges who thought very kindly of people who were working on technology. And they tended to decide in their favor in general. And now we're going through a period where it's the opposite. And I don't like that at all because I don't think it helps us. It doesn't help anybody involved with the stuff who uses it, who develops with it, who tries to see a new and more powerful future out of it. And that's a shame, because a few are the ones responsible for a larger issue. The other thing is there was a spirit of anti-professionalism. And it's fun to be a rebel, and that's okay. It's, you can wear your hair differently, you can do a lot of things differently. But professionalism is an interesting thing. It's something that really comes in valuably when you go and try to convince somebody that you've done a good job with something. And I always thought that professionalism was going to make a big difference here. And I'd like to see it return. I think that it's going to be part of seeing it, that we get through this period well. The small-time hood attitude also, I've seen it lately in some things in the newspaper. I don't think that helps this. We've got to realize this is still a software industry. It's not going to vanish overnight. So, when is it all going to end? This is just another bubble burst. Perhaps you've seen a few of them. Perhaps you've suffered through a few of them. I think it's going to end when we get back to dedicated, disciplined professionalism. I saw around places like Sun an attitude towards something called over-the-fence code tossers. That's the way they were described. And I thought that that was a ridiculous joke, because anybody who believes that they can have something vanish in the course of time is simply fooling themselves. Bits can live forever. They can be eternal. That's actually something that's afflicting the media industry right now. They're just as worried as one copy getting out the door as 1,000,000 copies getting out the door, because the one copy can be turned into 1,000,000 copies in an eye blink. The internet can replicate so fast. You could probably design the world's fastest Xeroxing machine that could do probably complete copies of everything in a few microseconds with enough parallelism and enough scripts thrown here and there. So you got to respect this situation and clearly document your true work from the start so that it never, ever becomes an issue. And rapid responsive issue mitigation is what's going to drive us out of this as well. And with this, we'll build up a history of trust and reputation again. And with that, we'll be back at the beginning of the circle. And this does not defeat the open software model. It actually enhances the open software model. The open software model, I am fully committed to. I believe that it's going to be the case that we're going to see in our lifetime major changes as a result of it. But it's only going to happen in the context of something that's supportable, something that's defensible. Who wants to go and have one of these little episodes every few years? I don't think you guys want to see anything like that. Well, this is the way I think out of it. So what are we in store for? Here's what I unfortunately predict. I expect we haven't seen the big guns yet. The big guns probably later this summer. And I think we're going to see a lot of overreaching claims. And I think that's going to scare a lot of people out of open software development, and it shouldn't. And I encourage you, if you feel scared about this, to talk to people about it and to find ways of mitigating that effect, because it's the time actually to do very powerful development, very innovative work. No better time, because now is when it will be seen the most. I also expect that we're going to have an indeterminacy. Now with the lawsuit between Berkeley and USL, that continued for 2 years. I think this one will be longer, from what I'm able to guess. And I think that the indeterminacy will likely affect things. I know that people switched from 386 BSD to Linux because they were worried about 386 BSD being hit. It never got hit, but it didn't matter because people were going, it's going to hit, it's going to come down, right. and bad things are going to happen, and cats and dogs will be living together. So we're going to get some of that. And if you're a staunch Linux user, stay a staunch Linux user. Don't let any of this folderol confuse you. What you're working on is very important, and stay focused on what you're working on. And let the lawyers and the judges sort it out. They know best, eventually, these matters. And all we can do is hope that reason will prevail in the long run, and I think it will. But don't jump around, because it doesn't help you. We'll also see uneven treatment. We'll see selective targeting of some people, and that'll be very unfortunate. But that's what happens during these unfair times, and I want you to be aware of it. And yes, it's going to make a lot of people nervous, but it will happen. And I think that what the best policy is for something like that is to feed back through the public channels that that's not at all a fair or an appropriate thing to do. Companies eventually do respond to that in a proper manner, because they have to keep the goodwill of their customers. It may take a while, but that's the best policy on that I can recommend.
So do you think that Microsoft, to name one company, might indulge in that sort of thing? And I'm asking from a sense of my own well-being, because I work on Samba, quite a bit, and the discussion around whether or not they might target us.
Well, speaking specifically to that issue, the way in which companies go about this process is they are primarily motivated in a tight time towards finding a piece of revenue. And that's been long the reason why a lot of open source developers haven't perhaps thought as much about the issues I've been bringing up tonight. Because they went, well, you know, nobody's using this that can be targeted. What would they get out of such a thing? Here's the question you should ask to decide whether or not you're in somebody's vital way. By pushing you out of the way, can they gain a valuable foothold? Then they might do it. In the case that we're seeing right now, the valuable foothold is to be able to own the rights to a joint development project. That's the way I view it, anyways. And you can see how that can become extremely valuable. Now, in the case of a Samba, that means more file and print servers sold to companies. Probably Samba's contribution to file and print servers, probably a few percent in Fortune 500 companies. So a product manager isn't going to see that as a considerable target. Now, there are companies that just decide that they want to lock everything up. Like, there are media companies, and they spend a lot of time locking up the assets of long-dead television programs. They run around the web and threaten to sue people over little websites, fan websites, with tiny little bits of content on them. And I think it's probably one of the stupidest things I've ever heard of in my life, that they believe that's part of how they police their assets. And I think that that's perhaps an overreaction. So people can still overreact, but generally I would imagine it's coldly, shrewdly thought through by a product manager going, I could get this, and I'm never going to get that revenue anywhere else. So my guess is probably no in your particular case. But I think that you've got to realize that if you have any involvement with something that isn't as good as it should be, maybe there's a way of doing better, and maybe there's a way of doing more. You should never have to ask that question in the first place. You should be able to go, I have free rights to use these interfaces, and that's not something that's covered by an intellectual property right. And the mechanisms by which I do that are all documented in these ways in terms of prior art in these areas. So I feel satisfied that my level of scrutiny for what I am doing is quite adequate, and I've made a conscious decision to find those things out. And thus, if I was to be involved in such a process, I could say, this was my process, this is how I did my process, these are the results of my process. I may have found these issues, I remedied them in these ways, and that is considered very strongly as a very positive defense. It makes it very difficult for people to prove you had an ulterior motive to effectively, if you'll pardon me, screw them. And I think that that's, as open source developers, you always have to do that. I was always conscious of it with 386BSD because I wanted to respect the other people there. That was my prime reason for doing it. Because I wanted to be able to with my customer, which was a reader, I wanted to do what they asked of me. Once done, that was up to them whether they took it further.